Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Middle East Matters with me, Nadia Massi. Here's what's coming up in the show. A three-day general strike in Iran and a show of defiance in the streets. This as authorities send out conflicting messages over the status of the morality police. Also in Iran, we will look at the evolution of the hijab, banned in the 1930s and mandatory today. We'll ask, why has the veil become such a politicised symbol in the country? And in football-mad Lebanon, fans skirt regulations to stream World Cup matches in the absence of official broadcasting rights. We start the programme in Iran, where a three-day general strike is in place this week, a show of defiance as the anti-government movement approaches 3 months with no sign of abating. On Monday, the strike was observed in dozens of Iranian cities, from the capital Tehran to Isfahan, Tabriz and the Kurdish regions. It is the greatest existential challenge to the regime since the revolution of 1979, and it has responded with a crackdown. Hundreds have been killed and thousands more arrested, including 11 sentenced to death. Well, in Iran this week, there are renewed questions over the status of the morality police. Several days ago, the country's Attorney General suggested the group, which is responsible for women's attire, had been disbanded. That was seen by some as a concession to the protesters, but many Iran analysts remained sceptical, arguing there was no evidence the mandatory hijab law was being relaxed. In fact, patrols are reported to have been stepped up in several cities. Well, we'll get some analysis on that in a moment, but first, a look at the evolution of the morality police with France 24's Nick Rushworth.
There have been protests across Iran for weeks. The anger is directed at the country's morality police. Demonstrators accuse the force of killing 22-year-old Mahsa Amini for not wearing her hijab correctly. Her death has thrown their fight against the so-called bad hijab into the spotlight. It is a war as old as the 1979 Islamic Revolution itself. The morality police since then has taken several forms. Its latest expression is the Gasht Ershad, or guidance patrols. Founded in 2006, many of its agents are from the Basij, a hardline paramilitary unit. The group has been called the Supreme Leader's Fashion Police. They are tasked with stamping out un-Islamic dress. This includes making sure women cover their hair and wear long, loose-fitting clothes to disguise their figures. Agents also target men with Western hairstyles and reprimand those who engage in noise pollution and unsafe driving. Under reforms which took place in 2016, morality patrollers are only allowed to report those who are found not obeying the rules to the police, who then decide what further action should be taken. In Mahsa Amini's case, patrollers arrested her and took her into police custody. She died in hospital 3 days later.
Well, I'm very pleased to be joined now on the programme by Professor Azadeh Kian, an Iranian sociologist and author. Thank you very much indeed for coming in to talk to us today. You'll have heard these reports coming out of Iran that apparently the morality police is to be disbanded. There's been lots of scepticism of that as well. Do you believe those reports?
Well, absolutely not, because these are just rumors, and we had no confirmation from the government and or the Ministry of Interior about the ban on the morality police. So it turns out that it was just a declaration of the Iran's prosecutor to kind of divert the attention of the population and also the foreign media on these 3 days of strike that was announced in Iran by the opponents.
Let's talk specifically about the hijab if we can, because as well as these reports that the morality police is to be disbanded, there have been these other reports coming out of Iran that the mandatory hijab law is under review. Do you think that's really true as well, that there is this idea to scrap the law, meaning that women could freely walk around with their hair uncovered?
Absolutely not. I think that they just cannot abolish the law, a mandatory wearing of the hijab, because this is at the ideological foundation of this regime. What you're doing is actually, if you look at the law that was promulgated in 1983, it has, you can either, women who do not wear the hijab can be condemned to 3 months imprisonment or a financial they have to pay
A fine.
A fine. And what they are trying to do now is to say that, okay, women who do not respect the veil should pay a fine. But I think that the law on veil will remain, and the veil will remain compulsory.
And you talked about 1983, which is when the veil was made compulsory. Now, that followed the Iranian Revolution of 1979, and there were big protests then as well, weren't there, by women saying we don't want to be forced to wear the hijab. As an academic, when you look back at those protests, do you see today as a continuation of what women fought for in the late 70s and the early 80s?
Well, absolutely. Although the generations have changed, but the compulsory veiling, as you said, was really not accepted by many, many women, especially women who were students, women who worked especially. And then thousands of them took the streets of Tehran and elsewhere to protest against its obligation. Nonetheless, they always also, although they was repressed, they always continued to protest against compulsory veiling. And I think that these youngsters who are now protesting and they just unveiled are the daughters or granddaughters of the same of the generation who really started protesting against compulsory veiling.
That said, there is a paradox here, isn't there? Because attitudes in Iran have shifted enormously. I mean, if we take ourselves all the way back to the 1930s when the Shah was in power in Iran, he said no woman could wear the hijab, and then women came out into the streets to protest, to demand the right to wear the hijab. So it's always kind of been a political symbol, hasn't it?
Well, absolutely, but that was not the Shah, but Reza Shah, the Shah's father, who came into power in 1925 as a king, and so he declared, he banned the hijab in 1936. But then, of course, at the time, a lot of the majority of Iranians wore veil, and they were traditional, and so not wearing the veil was as if they came to the streets just completely naked. So that's the reason why they protested. But the thing is that the state tried to decide for women what they needed to or what they need to wear. But under the Shah of Iran, who came to power in 1941 up to 79, women were free to wear the veil or not to wear the veil. So under the Shah, there was no compulsory veiling or no ban on the veil. But anyways, yes, usually the states try to decide for women what they should wear or not. But what women really demand in Iran is the freedom of choice to wear the veil or not to wear the veil.
Azadeh Kian, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Well, we end the programme now in Lebanon, a country that has never qualified for the World Cup, but nonetheless, many Lebanese are big football fans. But it's not been easy to watch the games this year. The state television channel did not buy the broadcasting rights, meaning viewing the matches during a time of immense financial turmoil has become something of a luxury, as our team in Beirut now reports.
The atmosphere's tense in Mono near Beirut's downtown neighbourhood. Tonight, France are playing Tunisia. The place is busy, which is good news for the organisers who've had to pay nearly €8,000 for a licence to broadcast the World Cup. As for the customers, they're paying on average €15 each per match. It's definitely a luxury for those on modest incomes.
The minimum wage is €25 per month. To watch the game on TV at home, you have to pay €90. It doesn't take a genius to do the maths. A sport that's supposed to be a global celebration has now become a sport for just the wealthy in Lebanon.
In this poorer area on the west side of the capital, nobody wants to miss any of the matches. Mohammed and his friends have pooled together to offer the residents of his neighbourhood the chance to watch the World Cup for free, in the streets.
All the youngsters chipped in to pay for the channel subscription so that we could watch the matches and cheer on the heroes of the teams from the Arab world and from other countries.
At the neighbourhood cafe, I would have to pay around €5. Here I can watch the match for free and just pay for my shisha.
The outgoing information minister fought hard to ensure that the national channel, Télé Liban, could broadcast the World Cup. But those efforts were in vain.
The resigning government was unable to meet to take the appropriate decision, release the funds and transfer them to beIN Sports. I am disappointed and sad because Télé Liban has always broadcast the World Cup, but not this year.
Like many across Lebanon, Charles cannot afford a TV subscription or watch matches in a restaurant. He's had to resort to this illegal streaming application, which brings viewers the on-pitch action from Qatari stadiums.
My salary barely covers my rent and lets me fill my cupboards. To watch the World Cup for free, you just have to download this application and enter the verification code. All the day's fixtures are available to watch.
In Lebanon, the 2022 World Cup is much more than just entertainment. For many, it's a means to escape their everyday problems in a country ravaged by an unprecedented economic crisis.
That's it for this week's show. Thanks very much for watching. We'll be back at the same time next week.
In Ukraine, our reporter met those people who managed to escape Russian occupation.
Так тяжко. Там страшно вже було просто виходити на вулицю.
Галя, ти нацист, ти нацист.
Russian propaganda drums on with the myth of denazifying Ukraine.
Вы знаете, спрашивают, насколько сейчас страшно быть русским на Украине? Ну, примерно так же, как евреям в мае 1933 года в Германии.
Ideology turned into terror in occupied territories.
Я там купила новый холодильник, стиральную машинку новую. Нас освободили.
A special report into Vladimir Putin's war on Ukraine in this new edition of Reporters.